Eskom's three trade unions have rejected the utilities' revised and final offer of 5.25% from an initial 4.5% made as part of the continuing rounds of wage negotiations. The three unions, that's the National Union of Mineworkers, the National Union of Metalworkers of South Africa and Solidarity, revised their demands, with NUN and NUMSA decreasing it to 11% and 12% respectively from 15%, while Solidarity revised its demand to 9.5% from their initial request of 10.1%. So collectively, the unions are currently demanding an increase of between 10 and 15%. NUMSA says workers at Eskom refuse to continue to suffer while the financial mismanagement of the entity continues unabated. The next round of negotiations will be held next month, with Eskom saying it is hopeful that they will find each other for the benefit of the company and in the best interest of the country. To talk more about this, we are joined by Phakamile Hlubi-Majola, who is NUMSA's national spokesperson. And as mentioned, we had invited a guest from Eskom, but they were unable to do the interview this morning. Phakamile, good morning to you. Thank you so much for your time.
Good morning, and good morning to your viewers. Thank you for having me, Leanne.
Absolute pleasure. So the third round of Eskom's trade union negotiations with the utility began on the 23rd of May. The revising of your initial demand of 15% to 12%. What did you take into account when you made this decision?
Yes, so we met with Eskom last week, and it's standard procedure that during negotiations we will try and adjust our positions accordingly, because at the end of the day we do want to try and find one another. So last week Eskom made an offer. They went from 4.5%, and then by the end of the week they had offered 5.25%. And of course, even on our end, as you yourself correctly said in your intro, the unions also then adjusted their demands. We then shifted from 15% to 12%. We continue to engage with Eskom. Unfortunately, we do think that the 5.25% that they've put on the table, we think they can do better, particularly given the fact that workers at Eskom have not had a meaningful increase since 2016, 2017. Their allowances and their benefits have remained the same, whilst the cost of primary energy have escalated unabated. So our members are saying that if we are going to settle this round of wage talks, we would need some kind of increase, possibly even within the range of around CPI, but we do need to move closer to one another.
Yeah, well, I mean, this was we reminiscent of what was happening last year as well. I mean, in July last year, Eskom and the trade unions reached a settlement with the overall effect of this agreement on the wage bill being more than R1 billion over the period of the 1st of July 2022 to the 30th of June 2023. So this resulted in a 7% wage increase across the board for all employees covered in the Central Bargaining Forum to what Eskom called a damaging, disruptive and costly wage dispute that came to an end after workers went on an protracted strike. I mean, we saw stage 6 load shedding during this strike. We're already seeing stage 6 load shedding without a strike. So this would leave us in a very devastating situation if we had to see something like this unfold again. Can Eskom afford another strike? And of course, this increase that's being spoken of by workers?
So if I can just correct you there, and it's not obviously you who made the mistake, it's Eskom misleading the public. The wage increase did not result in a cost of over R1 billion for Eskom. The cost was 553 million. And this is precisely the problem that we have with some of the Eskom executives. In fact, it was Andre de Ruyter who made that false allegation, that they are always intervening on when it comes to the cost of salaries and benefits of workers. It's workers at Eskom that are keeping the grid from collapsing. It's workers from Eskom that are working tirelessly to try and resolve load shedding. And we find it frankly irresponsible and reckless that National Treasury has no problem with allocating funds and generous increases year upon year for these primary energy costs, which are collapsing Eskom. If you look at the operational cost of Eskom, 70% of its operational costs is to service these bloated primary energy costs which benefit the private sector. The cost of diesel, IPPs, as well as coal have ballooned over more than a 10-year period with no intervention from National Treasury, no intervention from Cabinet, even though Cabinet gave a directive in 2019 to say that the costs are bloated, these contracts should be renegotiated or set aside, but there's been no political will from government to do that. But every year, workers at Eskom must continue to sacrifice any allowances that they have, any wage increases that are due to them in the name of so-called poverty. Well, if they're serious about if it's true that they can't afford, then the first thing they should do is actually deal with their real cost drivers, which are these bloated, expensive contracts, and stop taking away from workers in order to fund these bloated contracts.
Yeah. Look, you are getting somewhere, I suppose, when it comes to these wage negotiations. It's a far cry from what the demands are. But when we started out, I mean, Eskom was sitting at about 3.7% that they were offering. Now we're moving up to about 5-point-something% as we did here. But this is still, they offered 7% last year, as I mentioned. There's a big gap between what you're asking and what they are saying they will give. I mean, can we reach this middle ground, or do you foresee that we will see what happened last year happening again, where things got out of hand a little bit?
Well, first of all, we really don't want to get to the point of what happened last year. And I think I must just be honest and say that the talks this year are better in the sense that the spirit of the negotiations has definitely been better than last year. Last year, we really were dealing with a very hostile, very inflexible management that were really not trying to engage in a meaningful way. They were extremely provocative, which is ultimately what ended up in the breakdown of talks. I must say I'm a bit disappointed in the headline that Sunday World ran, where they claim that we've deadlocked. We've not deadlocked. We are engaging. And that's why we've even set up another round of negotiations for the middle of June. We do think that we're going to find one another. There is genuine effort on the side of all parties to resolve this as soon as we can, because we are aware of the fact that load shedding is a crisis, and we really would try and ensure that we deal with this as soon as we can, so that we don't end up with a situation where workers get frustrated and it results in the pickets that we saw last year, which exacerbated load shedding.
You said that workers at Eskom have, for the last 3 years, been subjected to austerity measures. Let's talk about some of those austerity measures. What are they?
So when you look at Eskom's balance sheet, the overall costs for wages and benefits for workers have actually remained flat. They've remained at a total cost for all employees at around 33 billion. But the costs of primary energy have gone up from 83 billion in 2016-2017 to 155 billion. Yeah. So when we talk about austerity measures, we mean the fact that, for example, up until last year, the allowances had been completely scrapped and radically reduced. Some of the benefits had also been reduced. And of course, the increases that workers were getting were really minimal. And so we've been trying very hard to try and get workers back some of their benefits. We did succeed to a certain extent, definitely last year during those talks, to actually get some of those benefits reinstated. What we're basically saying is that, you know, our members are no longer willing to be sacrificial lambs, while Eskom has no problem with just feeding these bloated contracts. They can renegotiate them. And the question is, why won't they? Is it possibly because they are members of the governing party who are beneficiaries of these bloated contracts? I mean, I know you're not hearing us complaining about this for the first time. We have raised this issue at least for a good 4 or 5 years as NUMSA, to say that there is a real problem in the procurement expenditure at Eskom, and there is no political will from the shareholder, from cabinet, or from Eskom management to deal with these costs.
I know that you've disputed what Eskom are saying, that they cannot afford this and basically pleading poverty. I mean, I know you've come out quite with quite intensive figures in terms of you just spoke about them now, talking about that energy, the whole primary energy costs, and how that has escalated, and basically showing that you reject. This is what you are, NUMSA, is saying. We reject the narrative from Eskom management that they can't afford to improve on the wage proposal. They can afford to. Why do you say that they can? Where is the money that Eskom has that we don't really know about? Is this corruption that is swallowing up all the money and not going to the workers? Where is this money that you say they're not using to pay the workers?
No, we think they definitely can afford it. Even when they made their presentations, we still insist that there is money to ensure that workers are able to receive their increases. If you look at it, as I said last year, the total cost of the 7% came to 553 million. According to our calculations, we think that Eskom can definitely afford that. What Eskom is basically doing is scapegoating workers. So every time this happens, then it's just, oh no, we can't afford. And it's an easy argument for them to make, because unfortunately, most media houses just assume that Eskom is correct when they make this assertion. But it is our view that Eskom can do a bit better and find and actually allocate the kind of increase that would settle this round of wage talks. And this is what we've asked them to do. And this is why when we come back in the middle of June, we are hopeful that we will, hopefully settle on a figure that is mutually beneficial to all of us.
Yeah, above inflation. I mean, this, I suppose, is the controversial part of it all, is that people saying, why would Eskom employees deserve an above inflation increase when we see the state of the electricity grid and the services that we are getting? And this is in no way shaming the employees, because as you said at the beginning of the interview, these are the individuals that are doing their best to keep the lights on. However, above inflation, I don't think many South Africans are earning above inflation salaries increases at all, and yet the demand is not going to get any lower according to the unions. They want this and feel that the employees deserve above inflation. Why?
Because food inflation is high, cost of living is high. Workers at Eskom for 4 or 5 years have not received increases. They have been the ones that have had to swallow the pain of subsidizing the entire entity. And so we really think that it is time that they were cushioned. And, and I do understand where your question is coming from, Leanne, because there is this idea in the minds of many people that workers should not be asking for above inflation increases. It's not the wages of workers that are creating a crisis of inflation. In fact, it's the exorbitant costs that are driven by service providers, like the ones at Eskom, who are providing coal, IPPs, and diesel, who are responsible for this inflation crisis that we have. So why should ordinary men and women continuously tighten their belts so that a bunch of greedy capitalists can continue to enrich themselves at the expense of ordinary people? This is why we're calling on Treasury to be responsible. At the end of the day, these costs escalate year on year, double-digit increases in some cases for more than 10 years. What interventions has Treasury made in order to approach every single one of these service providers and demand that they justify why their costs are so exorbitant? Yeah. And so this is the call that we're making as NUMSA.
So I want to ask you about this, because it's a big story, and in terms of these wage negotiations, South Africans very worried at a time like this, where of course we are facing rolling blackouts. I mean, we sit with stage 5, stage 6, some say stage 8. We don't even know the difference anymore. But the reality is that South Africa is sitting in the dark, and there is this possibility of a total grid collapse. What happens should a settlement not be found in the next round of wage negotiations, which is taking place in June? This grid collapse is hanging over us, and if we had to get into a point where we're seeing the workers go on strike, and we see the people that are really keeping the lights on actually say, well, we're not going to, and put their tools down, this grid collapse, is Is it something that we could possibly see if workers walk away and say, we're not doing this?
So I've been, also listening a lot to what Eskom, the technical team, has been saying regarding the issue of the grid collapse. The load shedding that is being implemented is actually designed to prevent a grid collapse. And really, nobody wants a grid collapse. Certainly not unions, certainly not workers. And this is why we're doing everything possible to make sure that the lights stay on. I think what happened, and I think we must just be clear about what happened last year. As workers at Eskom are not allowed to go on strike. They're not allowed to go on a lawful strike because of the fact that they are deemed essential. What happened last year is that workers were picketing. And obviously we were already at stage 4 and 6, and that just worsened the situation. So, as I said, we are not, thankfully, dealing with the same kind of hostile attitude that actually provoked those pickets last year. Andre de Ruyter was completely obnoxious. I mean, we must just be frank about it last year. And his behavior was what triggered the responses that you saw. And we are hopeful that when we meet again on the 13th and 14th of June, we do think that we'll find one another. And that's why, for example, NUMSA is going to be meeting with its structures in the next couple of days. All workers at Eskom are going to give us a fresh mandate because at the end of the day, when we come to these talks, we want to come with a renewed mandate, with possibly a position that allows us to find a compromise somewhere in the middle so that we can actually settle this round of wage talks.
All right, we leave it there. Phakamile, thank you very, very much for talking to us. So that's an update on the wage negotiations for Eskom employees. Phakamile Hlubi-Majola, NUMSA, I beg your pardon's spokesperson, talking to us about Eskom trade union rejecting the utilities' 5.25% final offer as part of the wage negotiations. Of course, the union is demanding double-digit increases. Between all of them, there is the average of between 10 and 15% of the increases that they are asking for.